Whoa, I'm gonna stop you right there, before you leave a dislike and click on some other video. I chose the words in the title very carefully. It doesn't say, stop making open world games, because that would be a fucking stupid thing to say. What it says is, stop making games open world. As in, stop forcing games to be open world that have no business being such. What do I mean? Well, let's talk about it. If you've been looking around at the reviews for Rage 2, you'll see 6s and 7s galore. Perfectly average, middle-of-the-road scores for everyone. If you were to read most of these reviews, though, you'd find a common refrain among them that serves as the chief reason for such a low score. Now, it's not the action and gunplay. The actual act of shooting and blowing up enemies has been universally praised. Having played the game for about 12 hours now, I absolutely agree. The gunplay is very close to Doom 2016, which was the best FPS campaign in the last 10 years, by the way. So if the core gameplay isn't the problem, then what is? It's the wasteland. The world that you explore throughout your adventure, or rather, the endless desert that you slog through on your way to do more shooty stuff. The wasteland is an empty, uninteresting void of creativity from which no fun can escape, and while it seems unintrusive at first, the game's lacking number of fast travel points means you'll be continuing to slowly drive through the same areas again and again to complete your endless checklist of outposts and collectibles. Yes, you can just fly over the whole thing once you unlock an air vehicle, but when the most preferable option to traverse your world is to fly over it and not interact with it in any way, I think you've proven my point for me. But Rage 2 isn't alone. It's simply only the latest game that's had its overall experience dampened by a pointless, annoying-to-traverse open world. This practice has been happening all throughout the 2010s and shows no signs of stopping itself. With even the latest Ghost Recon games, tactical squad-based shooters, being turned open world for some fucking reason. Now, I have no issues with developers trying to change up the formula. It's something I can respect even when it doesn't work. The problem is that I genuinely struggle to think of a single example of a game that was linear being improved by being turned into an open world. The opposite is almost always the case. Final Fantasy XV was a great game that I thoroughly enjoyed, but that most people felt lacking in direction and narrative, finding grinding the same random mobs over and over again in the same places repetitive, which is understandable, as the entire first 70% or so of the game takes place in the deserts and forests on the outskirts of the kingdom, where, aside from an occasional secret boss or special bounty, you'll be fighting the exact same 3 or 4 sets of enemy encounters that scale to your level, robbing you of any sense of progression. The last act of the game, however, fixes all of these problems with a much higher focus on story, character interactions, well-structured encounters, and varied backdrops and set pieces. If the entire game was built like this, like something more akin to a Kingdom Hearts game, then I have no doubt Final Fantasy XV would have been an even better overall experience. Well, it's not the worst thing in the world and doesn't completely destroy the game. Other than occasional roadside bro banter and adding a million side quests, the game doesn't benefit from its open world. At least not more so than it would have had it been a linear experience. Or at least more linear than it ended up being. But let's move on and talk about a game that wasn't just slightly bogged down by an open world, but was absolutely destroyed by it. Mass Effect Andromeda. Now, put down the pitchforks. I know the story and the characters are shit too. I'm not here to defend that, don't worry. My point is that had the game at least been straightforward like the previous installments, the game would have at least been a decent squad-based space shooter, and you could have skimmed through all the terrible dialogue. It actually wasn't the god-awful story that made me quit playing Andromeda. It was the first time I was given free reign over myself and set off to explore some desert planet. After 2 hours of driving around and finding nothing of significance other than a few resources, I was pretty much fucking done with the game. I asked a friend of mine who had already played a few dozen hours into the game if this giant empty planet thing was a one-time deal, and other planets would be more like other Mass Effect games, to which he responded, "Nope." So that's when I went about looking for footage of the other planets, only to discover that, yes, every world is a giant soulless pit of barely navigable terrain with nothing interesting or worthwhile to do. That's the moment I stopped playing. I was enjoying the combat enough to sit through the atrocious story, but when I realized that BioWare had no interest in actually expending effort to craft levels, I decided I would no longer expend time to play their lazy cash grab. I think that these sorts of games fall victim to the same type of thinking. thinking that making an open world is easy. You could just morph up some mountains and trees, then toss a billion collectibles around and call it a day. This way, their game can be 50 hours long, and would you look at that, they didn't even have to do any actual level design. Making an open world isn't easy, though. There's a reason that Rockstar is lauded for their work, and the tens of thousands of man-hours that go into crafting every little aspect of their games. You need to make the world feel alive, and fill it with interesting things to do, and plenty of stuff to interact with. There needs to be places to see and people to meet on every corner. It needs to feel like a living, breathing world that you just want to spend days getting lost in, and exploring and experimenting. A barren, brown, sandy nothing with lackluster NPCs, a mile-long checklist of currencies to collect, and gratuitous mountains and valleys that halt your progress at every turn is not meeting any of those criteria. I am so sick and tired of these visit all the glowy spots on your map games that pointlessly elongate themselves by having you trek around some shithole in the middle of nowhere just to kill 2 monsters and pick up a box filled with one of 15 different upgrade materials. The art of a strong, focused, narrative-driven game is slowly being phased out, and it's getting pretty damn serious. There's less and less Uncharted's and more Watch Dogs being made every year. Every other AAA release is fucking open world now, and I promise you that all the people behind these games aren't pouring the insane time and skill it takes to create a proper open world experience on a yearly basis. It's just not possible to churn out that much content that quickly. I know it's called open world, but you still have to fill it with shit, for fuck's sake. You shouldn't be making your game open world unless you have the time, creativity, and resources to properly fill it out. Otherwise, you're just tacking hours of busy work onto your potentially excellent gameplay, bogging down what should be an 8 or a 9 down to a 6 or 7. And trust me, in video game terms, the difference between being below a 7 and above a 7 is a huge deal as far as public perception goes. Yes, I know a 5 should be average, but people don't understand numbers. Also, open world games are always filled to the brim with glitches and bugs, but I didn't have a good transition to bring it up, so I'll just say it. Open world games are glitchy. Insert Bethesda meme here. Oh hey, we've come full circle. But hey, if you say your game has an open world in advertisements and press releases, it sounds like there's a lot to do, even if it's a hollow, bland wasteland dotted with treasure shacks and randomly roaming mobs. Now, stop enjoying that actual gameplay you're doing over there, hop in your Doom buggy, and go fill out this checklist for me. We gotta convince people this game has content.
Destination reached.